It seems like that's a common theme in business too. A lot of people, when whether it's starting their business or transforming their business, they're going through some change. Like before the change is underway, there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of questions, well, what do I do here? What's going to happen if this happens? And how do I do this? And then when we're doing it, when we're working, like when you're running, you can't ask those questions anymore. It's just happening.
Yeah.
I mean, in anything that I've done that falls into the category of something I thought I couldn't do before I set out upon it, I had that same feeling of like, oh my gosh, at first, I don't think I can do it. 2 is maybe I can do it. 3 is I'm just ready to start because getting ready for this is so overwhelming and boring at the same time.
Yeah, no, it's true, and it's a difficult balance where sometimes, if you wanted to do 105 Ironman, you're never ready for that. You're never ready. It's like having kids. You're never ready to have kids. You just got to do it and crack on and be resilient enough to cope with the problems, be willing to change tack, pivot and turn. And if things go wrong, take a different direction quickly and think fast and be nimble and all that sort of thing. So that, again, that works in business and in sport. However, you don't want to go in too underprepared that, you make such big mistakes that it costs you a lot of time or money or relationships or connections, and you end up burning bridges. So, I think it's important to build a foundation and again, that's one of the pillars is planning, experience and planning. So it's important to build a good foundation before you get in, and then, work on your resilience and work on your decision making and have no plan B, but be as well. I'll contradict myself now. But be willing to move plan A around, move it to suit your situation. So for example, on the Ironmans, I would do my route on the bike in a different direction, on the run, in a different direction, depending on the wind. So if it was wind, I'd go one way, and if the wind was the other way, I'd go the other way. So that's me changing my plan and being able to just adjust and go, right, well, actually, I don't want to run down the straight river bit when there's an easterly. So I'll use that tailwind and I'll run back in the trees where I'm sheltered, and then vice versa. So, it's important to think of all those options. And then the other thing, whenever I go into these, I sit down and I spend a week on this. I think of every single possible scenario that could happen that could derail me. And I write it down and I find a solution. So, some of the big ones are getting run over on the bike by I've been run over once before. I could get run over. Right. How am I going to mitigate that? I'm going to have 5 bike lights. I'm going to have high vis, and I'm going to put reflective tape on my rear stays and on the back of my shoes and on the back of my helmet. And I'm going to just do everything. Right. So there's that. Then there's getting COVID. That was on my list. Like, right. No handshakes, which luckily the whole world's sort of on board with anyway nowadays. Wear a mask near people, which I landed up not doing in the end because I was mostly outdoors, but I put systems in place. And I think if you've got anything you want to do physically, business, hobbies, whatever, I think you should write down the what ifs. What if this happens, how am I going to deal with it? Or what can I put in place to make sure that doesn't happen, or the chances of that happening are less? And that for me is super important, super important.
Yeah, in that vein, one time my dad asked me when we were doing a business planning meeting, he said, okay, imagine we're sitting here 2 years to the day from this conversation and the business has failed. It's been an utter disaster. You didn't hit these goals that you set today. What happened? What's the conversation we're having 2 years from now?
About why? Yeah.
Yeah, and it forced me to recognize what those threats were I wasn't thinking of. I was just thinking about what was going to go well. And I go, oh, well, it would be because of this. Okay, that's number one threat. Well, if it's not that, then it's probably this. And just like you said, identify what those problems are, and then we can figure out how to avoid them, before going into the race or before going into that season of business.
Yeah.
When you work with business owners who are setting their stretch goals, what are the mistakes that people are making in setting and achieving those stretch goals?
So I do a lot of corporate talks, and I go into big companies like Google and Microsoft and stuff, and I talk about these sort of things. And I think from linking it into sport, I think I'm quite visual. I think people need to write things down more, I think, and as you say, write down the big scary goal. What's the thing the terrier's chasing, and be very, really embedded in your mind. 2, why are you doing it? I think people forget why they're doing things sometimes. I think sometimes, and I do it, sometimes I forget why I've decided to do something, and I get so overwhelmed and so focused on the end that I make mistakes because I'm forgetting that actually I'm doing this because I love it. It is my job, and I'm a better person when I have these big things to chase. I'm a better father, I'm a better husband, and all these sort of things. So just remember, why you're doing it. And then also the other thing I think about a lot is, if I wasn't doing this, what would I be doing? And that answer is always worse. If I wasn't doing ultra endurance sport, I'd probably still be a school portrait photographer. And even that in itself is enough fuel for the fire to put my ass in gear and get out and train harder, right? And then, think of all the things you need to do. What are the boxes you need to tick every single day? Or, maybe it's not every single day, but, there's some boxes you'll only have to tick once a year, some boxes once a month, some boxes once a week, and some boxes once a day. What are those? And for me, there's lots of training and stuff that I have to do every single day. Then I need to get my blood work done just to make sure I've got nothing going wrong with sort of iron and zinc and things like that. That's once a year. So I only have to do that once a year. So write down the important things which will ensure your success, and write them down. And then, as we've just talked about it, write down the things that you think will derail you, and then really focus on being in that position, because then if it does happen, it's not a shock to the system. It's not
So you mentioned these 10 pillars. One of them was the physicality, and I can relate to that. I understand that. Actually, I have no idea, but go with me. So when you talk about the mentality of it, though, what did you find was the biggest challenge in getting the mindset correctly?
My biggest challenge is, I think, it's a difficult one, because it's quite difficult for me to remember what I was like 12 years ago when I was starting. My biggest challenge now actually is being too confident, and I've got such, in my head, I'm like, man, I've done 105 Ironmans, I've swum the length of Britain, I've cycled around the world, man, I can do anything. And then I don't train hard enough and I get injured. So if anything, my issue now is my mindset's almost a bit sort of too arrogant. Let's go with arrogant, where sometimes I just need to realize you still got to put in the legwork.
You know anybody like that?
Yeah. I see that with business owners a lot. Is like, when we rest on our laurels, hey, we're number one in our industry for this or that or whatever. We've won this in the past. Like, that's when you stop. That's when you stop winning.
Yeah. The BlackBerry phones, classic example, isn't it?
Blockbuster. Blockbuster, BlackBerry. You see it in Nokia sports. Especially with fighters. God, they get to the top. They're the champion. And how could you not take that to your own ego? It's an individual sport. You're the only one. And then, I don't really have to try quite as hard. Boom. Devastating loss. And that's seems like a really common outcome. And when you talk about, I don't remember the person that I was 12 years ago, at least fully, you don't remember that. I see that in business too, is people think they remember what got them successful. People think they remember, and we all tell ourselves stories. Like, how well do you really remember your childhood? You remember some elements of it, and there's some things that you've forgotten, but those things that you've forgotten may have been just as formative as some of the things that you've remembered.
Yeah.
And so we forget, we try to, you know, design training programs for a business or mentor, you know, new employees and say, oh, well, this is what I did. This is what I did. First of all, I'm not confident that you remember that is even what you did. Two is you, after all of this time and experiencing success, couldn't even successfully probably teach exactly what you did because you're so removed from it. And I see that a lot. It's like, this is, you know, when I was starting out in this industry, I did these things, and so I'm going to have my guys do these things.
Yeah.
I think you're misremembering, and I think that you're probably not teaching it well because you stopped doing it about 12 years ago.
You've forgotten what it was like to not know that thing.